Many states in America are now restricting, even banning, books that discuss important social issues that can be used in our schools. It's a misguided attempt to somehow protect children. Our guest today will explore those developments and their implications. Stay with us.
Welcome to Justice Counts, the podcast that goes beyond the law to what's important to you. Equal justice for all is a guidepost for our nation, but how do we achieve that? Here are your hosts, writer-commentator Bob Gaddy and novelist-attorney Mark M. Bello.
Hello and welcome to Justice Counts. I'm your host, Mark M. Bello. My co-host, Bob Gaddy, and I are pleased to welcome two very special guests to the podcast today. Robert Kesten has worked globally promoting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and furthering democracy. His work has taken many forms, including writing and producing an award-winning documentary on the Holocaust and Concentration Camps in Poland. He worked on the Ghanaian Constitution, produced events leading to Ukrainian independence, and events for AIDS Day and decriminalization of homosexuality in Ukraine, which was the first Soviet republic to do. He's currently the executive director of Stonewall National Museum, Archives, and Library. He is actively engaged in the LGBTQ+ community and committed to using history as a tool to make sense of the present and form a community response for today, tomorrow, and beyond. Born and raised in New York, Kesten-Abravenel has had an interesting journalistic career. She covered the celebrity scene in South Florida for the Miami Herald and many supermarket magazines, those ones that you see when you go through the checkout line, which she claims she's done since the Kardashians were fetuses. He also wrote about restaurants, nightlife, and travel for Miami.com, the Daily Mail, and other publications. After 2016, though, she took a major left turn and started using her platform to speak up about politics, especially after being blocked on Twitter by a certain one-term, twice-impeached former president who has recently been indicted. She parlayed that into her current position as managing editor for Occupy Democrats and Washington Press, two of the internet's most followed left-leaning websites. She sometimes covers anti-Semitism in Palm Beach County for The Forward. When she's not fighting fascism, she collects hot sauces, raises twins, and attempts to learn Swedish from her Stockholm-born husband. I strongly recommend, as Bob said off air, that you follow her Twitter page. What is it, Leslie?
It's my name, Leslie Abravenel.
Okay. Oh, that's Abravenel.
Correct. Lesley.
Right. For the first time in history, only one teacher from the state of Florida is registered to attend the 10th annual SNEP Educators Symposium next week, April 13th to 16th, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. One teacher, no administrators, no government employees. Unbelievable. Robert and Leslie, welcome to Justice Counts. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Hey guys, I'm Bob Gaddy, co-host with Mark of Justice Counts and host of the Lean to the Left podcast, where this will also stream. Happy to have both of you guys with us today.
I'd like to start with Robert. Please tell us about the Stonewall Museum and Library, SNEP, and the symposium. As I just mentioned, there's only one Florida teacher registered this year, but this event is in Florida, and SNEP was started 10 years ago in partnership with Broward County Schools in Florida. What the heck is going on? Then tell our audience what SNEP is and why only one teacher is registered to attend the event.
Well, SNEP is the Stonewall National Education Project. It is, as you've said, in its 10th year. It was started with Broward County School District, so there were many more teachers from Broward and surrounding districts at the time of its inception. And I believe there are probably 2 Florida teachers by now.
Wow. It's 100% improvement.
but one has asked to wear a full facial mask so that she cannot be identified
Oh my God.
because she's very uncomfortable of what the repercussions might be. So it is definitely a scary time to be a teacher in Florida. And as we've seen from Sarasota County, it's a dangerous time to be a member of the school board, since a school board member on the Sarasota Board of Education has literally walked out of a meeting after being attacked incessantly, meeting after meeting, with no recourse from the chair of the board. So Florida is a tough state, becoming a more difficult state, and SNEP is a program for educators, for people interested in education, who want schools to be inclusive, who want schools to be welcoming, and who want to make sure that every single child, regardless of who they are, gets an appropriate education that allows them to become productive members of society. Stonewall National Museum, Archives, and Library is one of the largest LGBTQ plus organizations with a focus on collecting and sharing history and culture. Our library is probably the largest in the community. Our archives, one of the largest, and our museum, although not large, is powerful in that we get to share and display the materials and collections that we have, giving people a rare opportunity to see just how integrated and integral this community is with the rest of America, with the rest of the world, and certainly here in South Florida.
These attacks in Florida are just outrageous, and I understand that these type of attacks that are taking place on literature, arts, and music are spreading to other states. Can you guys tell us about that?
Just last week in Wisconsin, the principal, I believe, was fired, or a teacher might have been fired, simply because they wanted to do a song called Rainbow that was written by Dolly Parton or Miley Cyrus, and there's a recording of Miley Cyrus and Dolly Parton doing this song about walking in Rainbow Land.
Where was this, Bob? Where was this, Bob?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. Okay, go ahead.
And the children were told that they can't do that song, so it was taken out of the concert.
Walking in Rainbow Land, and
Walking in Rainbow Land.
Dolly Parton and Miley Cyrus. Come on.
You would think that who is more mainstream America than Dolly Parton? Dolly Land. She has a nonprofit that gives away free books to children all across this country. She's given millions of books. She has a program to send anyone who works at Dollywood, even if they're part-time, to finish their college education. She gave $2 million to find a cure for COVID. This is someone who we should be emulating, not censoring. It's terribly frightening that these are the kinds of things that are happening, not only in Florida and Texas and Mississippi, but in Wisconsin and New Jersey and elsewhere across this country.
Incredible.
Really is. And the stated goal is to protect kids. And what I don't understand is, why do the same groups who seek to ban books also seek to permit assault rifles? Why is the Second Amendment sacrosanct, but the first not so much? I wrote an op-ed in Washington Press recently called "A Book Never Killed 6 People, Including 3 Children, in Less Than 15 Seconds." They protect the guns, but they ban the books. What's going on?
They believe that they don't survive without their guns, and they believe that we challenge their system of leadership if we allow the books. So it's clearly more about power and the acquisition of power than it is about children and about the very notion of human rights. And it's shocking to me that as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it prepares to celebrate its 75th anniversary this December, that so few people know what those 30 articles say, and how something that came out of World War II and the Holocaust to make sure those things never happen again are so unknown by our society here at home and around the world. To give you an example of how unknown they are, a number of years ago, I was at a meeting with one of the people who had been chiefs of staff to Colin Powell, both at the Pentagon and when he became Secretary of State. And I had asked them what they thought was the biggest danger to the United States and security. And without blinking, he said, it is definitely disenfranchised youth. And I said, in dealing with disenfranchised youth, have you ever thought about implementing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? And he said, actually, I've not read it. The chief of staff of the Secretary of State at that point had not read it. So I gave him the short abbreviated version. And then he said, I only see one major flaw. And I said, and what's that? And he said, it would cost too little to implement. No member of Congress would ever vote for it and take the money that goes towards military and policing out of the budget.
Oh my God.
Hey, Leslie, Mark said in his intro that you were banned from Twitter by Trump. How is it that I don't understand. How did he ban you and why? I also heard that you were the managing editor for Occupy Democrats and Washington Press, two of the internet's most followed left-leaning websites. So tell me, what caused your Twitter ban? And tell us about your websites and your advocacy.
First of all, hello, thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Thanks. So 2016 happened, and I think everyone's lives changed, took a turn some way. So I was still covering celebrity vapid information and gossip, and yet I could not reconcile doing that and staying silent on what was happening politically, and especially in Florida, which has always been ground zero for insanity. But once Trump happened, all hell broke loose. So on the side of doing my job, my day job, I was screaming and ranting to Trump on Twitter, just responding to his ridiculous posts with facts and with collective shock and awe. And I guess after a while, I hit him too hard and he just didn't like, or whoever was reading his tweets, they didn't like what I had to say. They didn't want people to see what I had to say because, like I said, I was responding with facts. So he blocked me. He blocked me on Twitter. And then I was part of a class action lawsuit, which the Knight Foundation at Columbia University for Freedom of Speech represented me along with many other Twitter users, and he had to unblock me. Anyway, so for better or for worse, he unblocked me. That was 2016. And
Be careful what you wish for.
Exactly.
I was going to say Mazel Tov, but be careful what you wish for. I kind of being blocked by Trump. But
well, I would say that's a badge of honor.
It was, and it still is, but it just couldn't end on Twitter. It's just, I wouldn't be silent if he wasn't watching what I was tweeting. I was tweeting to someone else. So all of my Twittering activity that had nothing to do with celebrities in Miami seemed to gain a lot of traction, to the dismay of my then employers at the Miami Herald, because even though I was covering entertainment, they did not like my political voice.
Okay.
That's how I am where I am today, because I refused to back down and I wouldn't be silent.
I understand exactly where you are coming from, because when I moved to South Carolina, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, 6 years ago, almost 7 years ago, Trump was calling the media the enemy of the people. And I spent my whole career as part of the media in some way or another. And it really ticked me off no end. So I started a blog site called Not Fake News and called Trump out every damn day. And then I got a bunch of other people to join with me. Mark's one of them, and who also writes for what is now called Lean to the Left. So it's hard to stay silent when this kind of stuff is going on to our country.
How can you sit back? I don't understand. I know people are afraid and people kept saying, be careful. But you know what? If you sit back silent, then it happens and they get away with it.
No question. Leslie,
right.
think about it. If you're encountering what you're encountering in Florida, which has quite a few Democrats in it, think about Bob in South Carolina. You got to feel sorry for a guy like that.
I do. Florida has become a red cesspool also now.
Yeah, well, I understand. It's funny because DeSantis got in by the skin of his teeth. That's an interesting issue as well. He wasn't all that popular when he ran, and as a candidate, he was behind in the polls for almost the entire election. But anyway, I'd like to talk education for a second. Here in Delray Beach, as a nice Jewish boy, I belong to a small group that focuses on educating people about anti-Semitism. And as a small group, we struggle to find the right way to approach community outreach. And I argue with my community members about who we're talking to. But with regard to anti-Semitism and LGBTQ plus issues, which are near and dear to both of you, why do some people feel threatened by alternative lifestyles or non-Christian religions? And what can we do to educate those people who need education? What's happening here is we're having guests come and appear at our club, and they're basically preaching to an all-Jewish audience who agrees with everything they say. My attitude is we ought to be outreaching to those people who don't agree with what we say, what you did on Twitter. But I just wonder what your thoughts are about how we go about changing minds for people who refuse to have their minds changed.
You're asking me?
That's
I'm
a
asking
tough
either of you.
That's a tough question.
I'll say I feel it's not impossible, but they don't want to hear the other side of it. They only know what they think they know. The marginalized communities have been stigmatized for centuries. The anti-Semitic tropes, the anti-LGBTQ, the anti-Black. It's the marginalized people that they're afraid of it. They don't want to learn about it. How? I don't know. I feel like I'm screaming into the ether too. Like you said, I'm writing, I'm preaching, I'm tweeting, screaming about anti-Semitism. Yet, like you said, we get it. We get it. But when are they going to look at it and realize with facts that it's wrong? What they know is not right. It's deprogramming. They need cult deprogramming.
I think it's more complicated than that in the sense that the leaders of those movements often do not hold very strong feelings about Jews or gays or lesbians or Blacks or anybody else. They're looking to create a power base. And what they're doing is using things that they can manipulate to scare the rank and file of people who are not necessarily well educated or highly exposed to the world around them. And so it becomes very easy to use those kinds of things to make people frightened. And once they have people scared, they continue on that mission. And if something scares people less, they move away from that and go to something that scares people more. So it's no different when they come out against gays or lesbians or Jews than it is when they say you're going to take our guns away. They find the kinds of things, you're going to hurt our Christianity, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. They use those things as weapons. And what you're talking about is how do you get to the masses and break them from that chain of their faux leadership? Because it's those people who are looking for power and looking for money that use low-hanging fruit in order to corral people. And it was so obvious, Trump with his mastery, since you've been talking about him, while he was running, he was in one of those stadium rallies and he said, "We love the uneducated." And that the cheer that came from that group shocked me only in the sense that they didn't even know they were being insulted.
No.
So how do you expect to make inroads often with people who don't even know when their leader is insulting them and telling him you are all morons, and I love you because you're morons, and you follow me because you're morons. Education is our greatest tool in fighting hate and prejudice. And it's how we get access to the tools to educate and how we refine our system of communication so that people understand what we're saying. That's what the other side is so good at. Everyone who comes across the border is a rapist, a murderer, and a drug dealer. That's not hard to misunderstand. It doesn't have to be true, but it's very clear.
Right.
When you say it the other way, it is much more difficult. These are mothers and children that are escaping terror. Why do they have to escape here? Or Muslims blew up the World Trade Center. We should be afraid of Muslims. 3 or 4 Muslims blew up the World Trade Center. So why would you be afraid of a billion Muslims? That's the question. But we don't have the easy tools and we don't use them well. So therefore, the other side has an unbelievable advantage, as Leslie said, and they've had that advantage for millennia.
And look at Fox News. They just busted them for lying to the people, to the morons, the poorly educated. What's going on with that? They're still on the air espousing conspiracy theories, anti-Semitic tropes, homophobia. I don't know. It's amazing.
Even though they're admitted liars.
Right, exactly. How do you fix that?
The only way to fix it is really organizing masses amounts of people. And in this day and age, that is extraordinarily difficult.
Bob, that was my point, though. If in our little group, presenting a speaker like yourself to a group of 100 Jewish people at a community center, they're going to love you. What I want is for you to appear at a Southern Baptist church and convince those people that their feelings are ridiculous.
It's not even about convincing. It's about finding ways to get them to open up. And that's one of the things that we used to. I'll give you an example. I gave a speech in Alexandria, Egypt during the Arab Spring.
There you go.
And there I was.
Talk about hating Jews.
Yeah.
And gays and blacks. But after my speech, this woman came up to me and she said, "Could I give you a ride back to your hotel?" And I said, "Sure." And we walk out to her car with her husband and her son, and they all get in the car. And the first thing she does is she turns to me and said, "If we have human rights in Egypt, would my imam have to do same-sex marriages?" And I said, "Where did that come from? I didn't mention this in my presentation." She said, "I must know." And I said, "No, your imam would not have to do same-sex marriages. Human rights doesn't mean forcing people to do things that they don't want to do. It means respecting people for who they are under the law." So I said, "You don't have to invite LGBTQ people to your house for dinner. You don't have to have them as friends. You just have to understand that they have as much rights to society venues as you do. And when you decide that you don't, then you can't complain that the rest of the world is mean to Muslims, because you have opened that box. You are the one who has said that prejudice is okay, that hate is okay. Yeah. Now, if you can live with that, then be as prejudiced and hateful as you want to be. But if you want people to understand that people who follow Islam are complicated, unique individuals, then you have to open up your heart and allow other people in, at least under the rules of law. And she turned to me and she said, "You know what? I can live with human rights."
Makes sense to me.
Well done.
So that was 3 people in that car, aside from myself, that understood that what they're doing is making people oppose them rather than allowing for them to impose hate on others. And those are the kinds of conversations that we all have to have. A group of us, well, a small group of us, tried to get editorials into the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, and other right-leaning publications, asking them to put their coverage of the LGBTQ community, the Jewish community, and other communities in context. Stop using the derogatory, start using context, historical context. And we said that our archives, our library is happy to provide that contextual information where you present something that's happening at that moment in that time frame, which gives a skew that is absolutely incorrect. Of course, they've ignored us so far. It doesn't mean that we'll stop, but it does mean that penetrating places where people have accrued power based on the existing system is not going to be easy.
Well, please don't stop.
That's for sure. I know that Jews represent roughly 2% of the US population. Muslims are about 2%. LGBTQ is about 6%. 14% is Black. These four groups combined are less than a fourth of the population, as 44% identify as white Christian. Now, there's some overlay between the LGBTQ community and other communities, of course, but where are these numbers heading in the future? And are minorities any kind of real threat to white Christians, or is all this just a bunch of nonsense meant to divide us? And what's the perception and what's reality around here? Stay tuned for Robert's response to that question when we return from this break.
The truth of the matter is, it's a power grab.
Yeah.
There are, once again, these leaders, the Ted Cruzes, the Lindsey Grahams, have a power base and are in power because of this perception that the Jews will replace us, or that the LGBTQ community are groomers, that we're all out to get their children. It's all based on those stereotypes that were fostered in Tsarist Russia. We use Christian children for Passover. We use your children today for our sex toys. Of course, none of it is real. And if it was real, everybody would be in prisons somewhere. But there's no evidence of any of this, except for in the imaginations of people like the late Jerry Falwell and members of Congress who are trying desperately to convince white people, white Christians, white Christian males, that their way of life is under threat. Their power will be gone. These other people will replace them, and their homes and their schools and their jobs will be gone because these people are multiplying like rabbits and we want to take over the world. And of course it's lunacy, but none of this is based on reality. It's all based on fear. So certain people, Donald Trump, others, can maintain power. And maintaining power means maintaining wealth. And when you look at the population that controls the bulk of wealth, not only in America, but around the world, it is no surprise that it is white Christian males that control the bulk of that wealth. And that's why it's not a surprise that white evangelical churches are spending millions and millions of dollars in Africa to get these African states to institute laws instituting the death penalty for their LGBTQ citizens. Uganda has done it. Kenya is contemplating doing it. Ghana, which was moving in the right direction, is now moving in the wrong direction. And so goes the sub-Saharan continent.
As if that's a choice, as if you choose to be gay.
They think so. They think so. That's the propaganda. That's what they believe.
Yeah.
But open up their closet, go into their closets. They're huge walk-in closets. They're all hiding it. Because if you look at who the groomers are, they're not the drag queens. It's not the books that my kids are reading in school about racism. We have a list, a massive list of GOP pedophiles, groomers, and convictions for child porn, sex trafficking, and the majority are of the Republican Party at this point. That's a fact.
Let's turn the page a little bit. Robert, I saw that you produced an award-winning documentary on learning about the Holocaust and concentration camps. Talk about denial, be that as it may. I have a three-part question about this. First, are you receiving Florida-type pushback on Holocaust education in this country? Second, could you compare or contrast the current anti-Semitic and anti-LGBTQ movements going on today to 1930s or 40s Eastern Europe? And third, how can citizens of goodwill and good faith turn this around?
Let's start with the third part. The only way you turn it around is by being very loud and calling it out when you see it. The power base is using the anti-Semitism and using the anti-LGBTQ rhetoric as a way of dividing those two communities and the Black community. And they're doing it successfully. And I'll give you an example. There were scatterings of anti-Semitic materials in those plastic envelopes that were thrown on lawns in Sarasota. And
out of airplanes?
No, people driving down the streets and throwing them. Could be on airplanes. And within days, there was a rally in Sarasota that had members of the government, elected officials, the Jewish community rallying against hate. Now, granted, the rally wasn't that big. It was a few hundred people, but everybody was, oh, look at all these people who turned out. It was interesting which politicians showed up. Oh, we won't allow hate here. Then the next week, exactly a week later, a mile down the road, there was a rally against the Don't Say Gay bill. None of those politicians were there. None of the organized Jewish community was there, but it also had a few hundred people, making it look like a successful rally. Those groups should have been united at both rallies, and it should have been thousands of people that were out on the streets, not just a few hundred. But the politicians, the power brokers, maintain that separation, that if you cross that line, you jeopardize your own people. If you cross that line, you'll lose the political class. If you cross that line, you lose the economic class. And we have to find a way to override that. Are there similarities between the 1930s and the 1920s and the 1800s and the hate that has gone on before? Of course, there are similarities. Book banning, calling people groomers, calling people money hungry, calling people lazy. All of those kinds of things are the same. The words don't change. It's just the distribution systems that change. Now it's so easy and so fast in order to do that. But the language is the same. By pushing for the death penalty in Africa, by pushing for the death penalty in parts of Asia, certainly in the Middle East, white Christians are goading their believers in this country to start to think that maybe that's an option. So how far away are we from those kinds of things? We don't know, because good people who do nothing allow bad things to happen. And that's exactly what we're starting to see, because people are scared. And when people are scared, they close their windows and close their doors and leave the streets available to the enemy. It's just like everyone should have an American flag. Why? Because when we allow the enemy, and I use that term loosely, to take control of patriotic symbols, then those patriotic symbols are used to fight against you. We're the ones with the American flag. We love our country. We're the ones who are waving those flags, not you. You people don't love America because you don't have a flag waving in your yard. If we all had, the flag would become an object that no longer carries the weight of those pickup trucks driving down the street, making people intimidated. But because we see that as a them and us kind of thing, we don't all have American flags waving. And that is a problem. So we can take away those problems by participating in being patriotic. We don't have to believe patriotism is the same. I believe patriotism is welcoming and curiosity, and people who love education, they may not. But the fact is that I can still be patriotic and I can still show that. And that's one way to start breaking down that monopoly that has been usurped by people who are on the extreme right. The other thing is to stop calling them Republicans. Republicans, as I recall, used to believe in the Constitution. These people don't believe in the Constitution and they don't believe in the rule of law. They're not. They're right-wing extremists, and they should be called what they are. We shouldn't allow them credibility by calling them one of the two political parties. So our use of words, our use of language is so unbelievably important that we have to break the cycles, and we only break the cycles with information, knowledge, and action. And those are the three things that will make the biggest difference. And just to give you an example, here in my office are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 American flags, and I keep one in my car so that if I'm at a rally or at a protest, I can always bring it out and remind people we are all Americans, and you cannot take that away from me, no matter how hard you try. And I can be all the minorities and all the marginalized people that you hate, but I still believe in this Constitution, and I have a right to follow the laws of this land and be respected by them.
Amen.
I've got this neighbor who insists on he has an American flag up all the time in front of his house, but he also has on the other side of his front door a rotating series of anti flags. Don't tread on me, for example, or a picture of a AR-15 with an X on it and it says, come and get it. It's just incredible.
Just imagine what your neighbor would think if you put an American flag outside your door and next to it an LGBT pride flag.
You know what? That's a good idea.
And then changed it with the Black Lives Matter flag and changed it with two can play the same game.
You know, I love that idea. I think I'll do that.
Put those flags up at my house, all of them, and I got my HOA threatened me with fines. You can only have the American flag. No other flag is allowed. Okay, I have it in my window now. Black Lives Matter, Trans Lives Matter. It's in my own house, so they can't say a word. But Florida, yeah.
My HOA would probably do the same thing because it's all right-wing nutcases here. But anyway.
But you can always take your HOA to court if you wanted to. If they're allowing his flags, then they have to allow your flags.
That would be great.
Mark, do you practice law in South Carolina? You can be my lawyer.
No.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't practice law anywhere anymore.
No, you don't. Hey, what advice do you guys have for kids who are struggling with these issues and feel bullied or out of place in school in their community?
I could start with this one. I have 12-year-old twins. I have a boy and a girl, and I teach them everything about everyone. So while they know that I'm rabidly against right-wing domestic terrorist extremists, they know that. They also know that we are appreciative and understanding of everyone for the most part, minus those who threaten us, but I tell them they have problems. It's just education. I make my kids read books at home because they're in Florida public schools, so you never know what they can and can't learn anymore. But it's just, I think it's so cliche, but it does start in the home because there are children my kids are in school with who are doing Heil Hitler. Where do you learn that? They're 12.
They're doing Heil Hitler?
Yep.
In
they have
school?
swastikas on their phones. Oh, yeah. I'm on the phone with the principal often. I say, I don't know what's going on there, but I'm telling you, this is Florida. So to arm my children, I arm them with knowledge, information, and hopefully empathy. It's not easy, though. It's so hard. It is so hard right now to raise children in this climate, but I'm happy to say that my children know about marginalized communities and they understand, they have empathy. It's all we can do is teach them and try.
Leslie, I'm what you call a snowbird. So I'm not in Florida all the time. But until DeSantis came along, Rick Scott was not a good guy, obviously, but I didn't notice I didn't notice this kind of stuff until Trump came along and DeSantis came along. In only 4 years, they've turned Florida into a fascist country, a fascist state. How did this happen so quickly?
It was so fast, but it wasn't overnight, because 20 plus years of GOP majority in Florida has led to this. We were very happy here. I moved here permanently after I went to college at University of Miami during the glory days of this whole state. I settled here in 1994 and lived very happily, ignoring, unfortunately, to my dismay at the end now, I didn't pay attention to politics in Florida. It was what it was. Only until, and that's also it's part of my fault that this happened. We allowed this to happen by being complacent. The sun, the fun, the taxes, whatever it was, great. It was going well for us. So did we care that much that Republicans were in charge? I didn't. I'm Generation X. We did not care. 2016 happened. Trump happened. We knew Rick Scott wasn't great. We knew Jeb Bush was whatever, but nothing compares to what is going on now, because I think it was a buildup. All of our complacency, complicity, and Trump led to where we are today.
I would suggest for anyone who hasn't read it, read Democracy in Chains. That gives you literally the roadmap to not only Florida, but the right movement in the United States. It's been in the planning stages for many decades. It was thought out, it was planned, and it is now being executed. And this book just walks you through the paperwork that exists and how they've moved into universities, how they've moved into classrooms, how they've moved into school boards, all very methodical. And there is nothing like it on the other side of the political spectrum. And they do not, as I said, believe in the Constitution. They do not believe in the rule of law. They believe in placing their people into authoritative positions so that they will be protected in and out, all the way to the glory of taking over the United States and emulating the dictatorships that exist in other parts of the world where democracy is considered a failure.
There certainly is a playbook. Gerrymandering is part of that as well.
Right.
Absolutely, but it's all there. It's called Democracy in Chains, brilliant book, a little frightening because now when I read it, it was before, and so you didn't necessarily see how it would play out, but now you're literally reading something that was there was tremendous forethought, and now you watch it play out, and there is no easy solution to stopping it.
I did a little internet research to prepare for this podcast, and I found out that Robert once ran for the state senate in New York. And he did so because his son asked him this question: how can you ask someone to do something that you won't do yourself? And that little question all by itself caused you to run for state senate. Is that correct? Want to tell the story?
I was looking for a candidate to challenge our current state senator, and had meetings with people and was going to be very involved in that race. And my son, who has mental illness and so is always concerned about who is in office and what's going to happen to people who are in need of services, said, you fight for my services all the time. How could you ask someone else to do something that you're not willing to do yourself? So I said, okay, so I will run. And because I was clearly outside the political leadership and not in support of either party in terms of the way things were run in New York State, it became very clear very fast that Andrew Cuomo, who was then governor, was highly opposed to my running for office. And as I lined up one Democratic committee after the next and one group of supporters after the next, he started literally going out and soliciting candidates to run against me and giving major contributions to the political parties the county, city offices, the Democratic clubs that had already endorsed me, asking them to take the endorsements back. So I complained to the Board of Elections, the state Board of Elections, and they said, you do understand we're all appointed by the governor. So in this election, we can do nothing. And so they offered me, the Cuomo office offered me jobs and to leave the campaign. And I said, you don't really understand why I'm doing this, do you?
They offered you jobs? Did you already have a job?
They offered me employment and they told me how much they would pay me. And I said, you seem to miss the point.
What was so different between his platform and yours?
I said that you're not electing leaders, you're electing representatives. And it is very important that you voice your issues, because I'm not running to represent myself. I'm running to actually represent the people that would be hiring me. And I need to know what you're thinking and how you're thinking it. And we have to do away with a system that doesn't allow anybody else in the room. New York had a very closed system that the majority leader of the New York State Senate, the Speaker of the Assembly, and the governor would get together and decide the budget. And then they would present the budget to the legislature and ask for a vote. I said, that's clearly not democratic. If I was elected, I would ask them to break down the walls and let everybody see those negotiations. I did that a lot. I talked about the insider trading that went on. I talked about how much money New York legislators at that point in time could make as much money outside the legislature as they wanted by having another job. And in some cases, there were constrictions on what they could do, but they could make a fortune. So you had the Speaker of the Assembly, who was a lawyer, who could be making millions of dollars. And you had to know that in some way, shape, or form, some of those people were paying those fees because he was one of the most powerful people in the state. The same thing, the governor had a huge slush fund that he acquired for campaigning. That money was then divvied up to other candidates and whatnot. All unethical, if not even illegal. And so I campaigned against all of those things and asked the people to remember that in our system of government, it is we the people, not we the elected officials, not we the people who are appointed to office, but we the people have to decide what is important and what priorities we want set. And so he came after me with guns blazing.
What happened? What was the outcome?
The outcome was my primary opponent won the primary and then won the general election because he had the full support of the governor. Although my primary opponent, who now serves in the state Senate, also said that he had no special relationship with Andrew Cuomo, except for when he and I met, he said, I will only run if I have the full support of the governor. But we did that in the privacy of his home. And then on the campaign trail, he completely denied that conversation ever took place.
Is taping a two-party conversation legal in New York?
No, it is not without permission.
Hey, Robert, I read you have connections with both Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. Tell us about that.
My only connection to Martin Luther King Jr. was that when he was assassinated, and I realized how segregated the part of New York that I lived in was, I organized the elementary school kids in my grade and class. And my mother took me to a place nearby, a different community, however, that was a Black community. And she had me meet with this woman who ran a nonprofit there. Her name was Ruth Ransom. It was called the Open Door Center. And she explained to me how their community lived and the struggles that they had right next door to a community that I lived in that didn't even know that community existed. And so I said, what can we do to help? And she said, that a number of kids really need to get away for the summer. Could you help us raise money to send a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen kids to summer camp? That's the best thing that you could do, is one child to another. And so we set up a carnival and went out to raise money. And so I went store to store, and I was thrown out of stores.
How old were you? How old were you?
8, 10.
Wow.
He was thrown out of stores.
I was called an end lover and told to leave and never come back. And we ended up raising, I think, around $10,000, which back in 1968 was an awful lot of money. And we sent lots of kids to camp, and it changed the way I looked at the world. And just before that, Bobby Kennedy, and I think it was 1966, was running for the United States Senate from New York. And in those days, women would go to the beauty parlor and they would sit under hair dryers and they would be in there for hours. And my mother took me as this little kid when she was going to the hairdresser. And of course, I got really bored. And so I was looking out into the parking lot. This was a strip mall. And in this parking lot, they were putting up a stage. And I looked at the stage, and then they put up bunting, and then they said Kennedy for Senate. And because I was so little, I could squeeze right through the crowd. And there he was standing on the stage giving a speech. And he bent over and he said, "Hey, you." And he put his hand out, and I shook his hand. And I knew who he was because of the assassination of his brother. Even though I was young, the assassination of John Kennedy stays with me always. It's not something I could ever forget. So I knew who he was. And I remember running back into the salon and saying to my mother, "I'm never washing this hand. I'm never washing this hand." And of course, he won and became the United States Senator from New York and did some amazing work in the short time he was there. And then 2 years later, threw his hat in the ring to run for president. And I was 100% behind him as a little kid, which meant nothing, and then was completely devastated when he was assassinated.
Absolutely.
Have you washed your hand?
A few times.
Okay. All right.
But I saved the skin so that
Hey, you know what? I also heard that, Robert, that you were a performer and that you were in like 5 films. Is that true?
that is true. I also had a nightclub act in Beverly Hills,
Holy mackerel.
but I was never in one of Leslie's columns.
Yeah, no one sent me any tips on you.
We have to fix that today, Leslie.
Yeah, that's right.
I heard that you played a lawyer in one of these films. Did you like being a lawyer? Talk to me.
Did I like being a lawyer?
Yeah.
It was fun to be a lawyer in a movie versus a lawyer in real life. But yeah, no, acting is great fun. I'm still a member of the union. I have to, at some point, get to Miami and go meet my union representatives.
All right.
But yeah, that was a career a long time ago before I started doing all of this. But I figured if Ronald Reagan could keep his union card while he was in the White House, I can certainly keep my union card doing whatever it is that I'm doing.
Absolutely. I want to do a little rapid fire Q&A about what you've advocated for. Can you tell us what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is, please?
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as I said, was a response by the world to World War II and the Holocaust, putting human dignity at the #1 spot on the agenda as the way to fight hate and deception. It's not something that's respected, but we are working on a program now that on December 10th, we will give out an award to someone globally who is the personification of what human rights is all about. And we'll do a 3-day conference. We're hoping to engage some universities and communities from around the world to come to South Florida, because if we can move the needle here, we can move it anywhere.
Yeah, really. Walking in someone else's shoes to be able to truly understand human rights is a quote I noted that you've used in the past. Can you talk to me about that?
Yes. My mentor not only was a human rights activist, but also an artist. And she made these. There are 2 of them. These are casts made from Eleanor Roosevelt shoes. So I have a pair of Eleanor Roosevelt shoes. I used to keep them in my car, so they were with me wherever I went. Now that I'm in this office, I have them in the office. But the idea was that wherever I would go, I would take them out and I would say, you only know when you've walked in someone else's shoes. Otherwise, it's just your imagination. And the reality is that until we know what someone else went through and how they got to where they are, it's misinformation. And that is the most dangerous kind of information there is. So we always, before we voice our opinions or our views of who it is that is the other, we should always first walk in their shoes.
Next quote, every single story gets told. We're going far beyond LGBTQ, right?
Yes, but the reality is that history is everybody's story. And when we separate out the yarns or the threads of the people we don't like or the people we don't want to hear, it's no longer history. It's just made up. So if I take out the Black threads, if I take out the women's threads, if I take out the Greeks threads, that's not history. That's a story that I want to tell, but that's not the history of my community, the world, or anything else. Everybody's story goes into the tapestry of history. And in order to get accuracy in history, we have to understand that everything is interconnected and interrelated.
What I've always said is tell the truth, not the sugar-coated version of the truth, but the truth. But anyway, the other interesting thing you've said in the past, and this goes for white Christians as much as anybody else, is that LGBTQ is the only community that represents a piece of every other community.
It is the only community that has representation everywhere, and there's no way you can deny it. People try, but there are Russian gays, there are Iranian gays, there are Blacks and Jews and Christians, there are people from Norway, there are school teachers and policemen, there are politicians, there are mothers and fathers, there are grandparents. Every single group on the planet has someone that fits into the LGBTQ community. And my guess is that by the end of this century, we will have all 26 letters of the alphabet. And everyone will be in there some way or another.
I love it.
Leslie, we were talking a little while ago about Ron DeSantis. You call him Governor White Power on your Twitter feed, which caused me to immediately sign up for your Twitter feed.
Me too.
I have to give credit, though. Joy Reid from MSNBC used it first, so it's not mine. I have many names, but that was Joy's. But right on.
Okay, all right. How do you really feel about the guy? That's what I want to know.
I seriously never thought I would loathe someone more than Trump. I did not think it was possible.
Yeah.
I didn't. And I didn't want to hate anyone. Listen, no, I don't hate. I just don't understand. I don't get it. This is rock bottom's basement right now. That's Ron DeSantis.
Yeah. Okay.
You're a self-proclaimed wordsmith, which I believe is a dying art in America, especially with all this book banning. But to Bob's question, my three favorite quotes on your Twitter page are DeSantis taking credit for people moving to Florida, as if it's because of his policies rather than the weather or tourist easing the tax burden. Two, that Florida is a law and order state when it advocates for open carry. And three, and the number one quote on David Letterman's top 10 list, that Florida is number one in education. Unless you want to quote, you want to say gay, talk about slavery, the Holocaust, or any other dark period in history. What did you do with yourself before DeSantis became governor?
I wrote about the Kardashians.
Another dark part of American history.
Yeah, that's what I say. I can't.
When life was fun, we wrote about nonsense. I followed people around like Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck. It was vapid. It was fun. Oh my God, it's terrible. Everything negative is Florida, and he thinks it's the best thing ever. And this is why everyone's moving here. Florida is an oxymoron. Emphasis on moron.
How did you transition from being a gossip columnist to politics, to writing about politics and all
You
this
know
stuff?
what? I never
She got
realized
she
I
got
had a,
pissed. She got pissed off, I'm guessing.
I
Yeah.
did. I always had a big mouth for, my mother would say, you have a big mouth for the wrong things. So once this all happened in 2016, I woke up. I had an epiphany. I said, hold on a minute. I don't care about the Kardashians. I don't care about Jennifer Lopez. What the hell is going on? How did this happen? I covered Trump as a celebrity. I had been to Mar-a-Lago at parties, but never crossing my mind was politics and that he would ever be president. The evolution has been an interesting one, I must say. I pivoted. I couldn't keep my mouth shut on this.
Last question for either one of you or both of you. You guys, I'm sure, have been following the legal challenges to the Don't Say Gay law in Florida. I understand there's a federal lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of the law. Do you know where it stands and what's going on with overturning some of these draconian new laws in Florida that restrict our First Amendment rights?
The reality is that the federal law, I think, the federal suit, I think, is more focused on the Don't Be Woke bill more than the Don't Say Gay bill. Part of the Don't Say Gay bill, at least some of them, have already been thrown out of court. So people are refiling and looking at different ways that they can go about that. The woke stuff has been thrown out in one federal court. It's appealing into another court. There are many cases, many issues. Like in everything in America, you can keep things tied up in court forever. And the worst is yet to come if DeSantis really does decide to run for president. Right now, he's not doing so well in the polls. He's falling rather than rising. I think some of what he's done is backfiring, but it still remains to be seen. As you pointed out, Mark, the redistricting is what has made Florida this way. It's not representative of the people of all of Florida. I think that we see that now with the effort to take money away from Visit Florida, which is the Visitors Bureau, and put it into rural communities where their votes are certain and where those communities have less population, but giving them more power and more prestige is one way to secure votes. And so there's so many things that are going on that something has to give. And it may be that he peaked too soon. And so we'll see. But it also depends on how much information can be put out there, how many good people will stand up and stop being afraid. Teachers are going to have to stand up. Administrators are going to have to stand up. Librarians are going to have to stand up. And the families that support them will have to stand up.
I'll tell you something. I was part of another lawsuit against Ron DeSantis. I joined a group of parents when he decided to throw out the mask mandates from schools. We won our lawsuit. We won the lawsuit against Ron DeSantis. The judge ruled in our favor. What happened? Ron DeSantis's lackeys that he has in Tallahassee found a way to appeal our win. So Ron got his way. So I don't trust him with the law. I trust nothing about him here. I hope federal can do something else and fix this.
Thanks for being here, both of you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now one more break, and I'll be back in a sec with some closing comments. You know what? If you guys haven't done so already, please check out Mark Bellow's Ripped from the Headlines legal thrillers, all available online at Amazon and other major online booksellers. Mark has quite the hero in attorney Zachary Blake, who fights for justice on all fronts. His books are Betrayal of Faith, Betrayal of Justice, Betrayal in Blue, Betrayal in Black, Betrayal High, Supreme Betrayal, Betrayal at the Border, You Have the Right to Remain Silent, and his latest, The Final Steps, a Harbor Springs cozy legal mystery. Also, he's written a wonderful children's book about bullying. It's called Happy Jack, Sad Jack. For more information, just check markmbello.com. Now, until next time, this is Bob Gaddy for Mark Bello, signing off for Justice Counts.
Thanks, Greg.